Okay, chapter 4 deals with tissues. So we started out with our level of chemistry, talking about atoms and molecules and things like that. And then we made our way up to talking about the cell and how the cell works with the organelles, how cells make protein, how cells transport things in and out, and how cells go through cell division. So now we're going to put a bunch of cells together and make up the different tissue types, okay? Study of tissues is called histology. So when we look at these tissues, it's a group of similar cells that are in close proximity that are organized to perform one or more specific functions. And we put these into 4 different classes. We put them into epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissue. And then within each one of these classes, there are a number of different tissue types. For instance, we'll get to muscles. There's 3 different kinds of muscle cells, okay, or muscle tissues. There's cardiac muscle, there's smooth muscle, and there is striated or skeletal muscle, okay? So let's take a look at these. We're going to start out with epithelial cells. Now, with epithelial cells, these are going to cover the body. The characteristic here is they cover something, okay? So, from a characteristic standpoint, they have cellularity. They are stuck together and they form a boundary, okay? And it says as far as polarity goes, okay, there is a top and a bottom to them. So notice in this picture where the white is up at the top and there is the cilia sticking off. I know that that is the top part of the cell, and where it attaches down here at the basement membrane, that is the basal part of our tissue. So that tissue extends from the cilia that belongs to the cell. The cells are here, and then you get to this point here, and this is that basement membrane that it's sitting on. So this is the tissue, okay? Like I said, that basement membrane it's sitting on is called the basal lamina, so it's attached to that, and usually that's a support tissue or membrane. All epithelial tissue, they are avascular, okay? Epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning it does not have a blood supply. It gets it from either on the outside of it or from the apical portion, or it gets it from the basilar portion. And most of the time, the basilar portion. And number 5 is typically there are stem cells here, and we're going to do a lot of regeneration. We're going to do a lot of cell division. So coming out of this cell division chapter, this is one of those tissues that have lots of stem cells in it and goes through cell division pretty rapidly. So this can oftentimes allow for there to be cancers in this kind of tissue because it is known to go through cell division so rapidly. From a functional standpoint, it's going to provide protection like our skin does. It's going to control permeability like our skin does. It's going to provide sensation like our skin does, whether we've got nerve innervation there, and it's going to produce specialized secretions. We're going to talk about the glandular secretions that occur in this epithelial cells as well. When we see some specializations here, the goal of these epithelial cells are to have specializations that move fluid over the epithelium, okay? So a lot of times, like in the stomach, there is mucus that is secreted so that we can move the fluids across this and protect the lining of the stomach because there is hydrochloric acid being released here as well. The second one, move fluids through the epithelium. So allow things to move through, meaning the permeability, okay? So a lot of times we will see oxygen here in the lungs, carbon dioxide move through this epithelium. And then the last one that we're going to have specializations that allow us to produce secretions. And that's going to be protective, like you see in the first example with the stomach, or it can be messengers that we can send information out. okay, and make something happen in another part of the body. Okay, along with those characteristics, there is the need for us to have both microvilli and cilia on the cells. Now, a cell wouldn't have both at the same time, okay, because cilia's job is to move the fluids across, where the microvilli's job is to send stuff across, be it absorb it, bring it in, or send it out. So this allows, in both cases, it allows for more surface area of the cell to allow more things in and out if it's microvilli. And if it's cilia, we talked about the job of ciliated cells, for those cilia to beat and to move the fluid across it, okay? You can see this on the right-hand picture. You can see the cilia with the little microfilaments that are underneath it that are allowing it to move. Okay, so we look at epithelia. The names of them are based on what they do. Okay, they almost tell you what it's going to look like. Okay, so if the epithelium is only one cell thick, okay, meaning one cell sitting on the basement membrane, we call it simple. If it's more than one cell sitting on that basement membrane, we call it stratified. Okay, so let's look at that. One cell, notice across this top portion here, these are all simple. Okay, and then the second word that we look at is what the shape is. If it is squamous, it's flat. If it's cuboidal, it's square or cube shaped. If it's columnar, it's like a column. It's a much taller cell. Okay, so we just put these together. Here is a single flat cell, that's simple squamous epithelium. Here is a single row of square cells. These are simple cuboidal epithelium. And then these are tall cells. This is one row of those, simple columnar epithelium. And you can see the microvilli sticking off of the columnar epithelium. Right there. Okay. Now, if it is stratified, we can have stratified squamous. And notice that the cells get flatter as you move toward the surface. This is what our skin is, okay? So you have flat cells at the very top. We can be stratified cuboidal. We can be stratified columnar, okay? And then here's some pictures of those over here on the right that are taken from the microscope, okay? So when we look at simple squamous epithelium, anytime it's simple, we're not doing a lot of protection here. It's all about moving things across it, okay? So it's thin enough that we can make things move from one side to the other, okay? Whether it's this way or that way. Let's draw on those funny lines, though. Okay? So, simple squamous, all about absorption and diffusion, bringing it in, sending it out across. If it's stratified squamous epithelium, that's all about being protective, okay? So you know that if you've got calluses on your hands, that's to be more protective, okay? Your body realizes, okay, I need more skin in this area because they tend to wear this part of it off more, okay? Cuboidal epithelium, simple versus stratified. Simple up at the top. Again, if it's simple, it's about moving things through, so secretion and absorption. Stratified, when we see this one, we're going to see some glandular epithelium. A lot of times our glands are stratified cuboidal, okay? And you can see it's more than one cell layer thick. You see a couple of cell layers thick. You see the nuclei of those, okay? And then we've got the columnar epithelium. We have three types of columnar that we talk about. Simple, where there's just the one row, okay? One row of cells. So from here to here, that's the cells with the nucleus on the inside. Here's the basement membrane it sets on. So simple columnar. Then if we go down to the bottom, this is stratified columnar, more than one cell layer thick. And then the one in the middle is called pseudostratified. Pseudo means false. So falsely stratified columnar epithelium. This one's interesting in that some of the cells, all the cells are attached to the basement membrane down here. Some of them make it all the way up here to the top, okay? So like a cell like this one makes it all the way to the top, okay? But some of the other cells don't. Some of the other cells are small. They haven't grown that much yet, so they're stuck down here. But everybody is attached to that basement membrane. So it is only one cell layer thick, but it looks like it is more than one cell layer thick, hence the name. Okay, here's just some pictures. Again, simple squamous epithelium, the top, simple cuboidal epithelium, and simple columnar epithelium. Now, when I'm teaching this to students, I always say, okay, with epithelium, what you're looking for is a place where there's nothing, okay? Because if there's got to be nothing for where the top of the cell is. So notice that inside of this circle where this white space is, there's nothing, okay? So that's going to make this the top of our cells, okay? And then here again, here is the white space. So this is where there's going to be stuff in here that we're going to be moving, okay? So imagine your skin. There's the top part of your skin, and then there's the part that you'd see that there's not skin there. So it's going to be white space. So we're going to see this white space again. Down here with the pseudostratified, here is where we're going to be moving things so that we don't see anything. We can see the cilia, and we can see the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. That's a mouthful. Okay? So look for that white space when you're looking for epithelial cells. Okay? With glandular epithelium, we're going to find all over the body, and the job of these are to produce secretions. Now, we can do it two different ways. We can do endocrine, where we'll put it into the bloodstream, okay, through the bloodstream, and it's going to be traveling all over the body. So there's no ducts for this. Exocrine glands, okay, this we're going to put through duct systems and allow them to make it to a particular surface, okay? So when we think about this, notice that the breast is part of epithelial tissue, okay? The glandular portion of the breast it's a tubular alveolar gland from our integumentary system, and it's going to produce milk through a ductwork system that will make its way out onto the nipple, okay? Here is below that, here is a little, this portion right here, this is the sebaceous gland, okay? It's the oil gland for the hair, okay? And this oil gland moves it through a little duct and out here onto the surface of the hair shaft and allows us to lubricate that hair, okay? So if your hair gets a little oily sometimes, that's due to that oil that's being produced there, okay? Now, endocrine glands, they're going to move things into the bloodstream, okay? Now, the salivary gland doesn't do that, okay? That arrow should not be pointing to it being an endocrine gland. What this is saying is this has a ductwork system that makes its way into the mouth, okay? So all three of these are exocrine glands, not endocrine glands, okay? How do these release their secretions, okay? We got three different ways, okay? The normal way that we learned earlier was through exocytosis. We're going to make it inside the cell. We're going to send it to the Golgi body. The Golgi body is going to make a secretory vesicle out of it, okay? So here's our Golgi body, and it's going to make the secretory vesicle. Once it's created, we're going to send it out, and we're going to dump the contents on the outside, okay? So all along, these are being dumped. The product is being dumped, okay? We do that with sweat glands. Just keep producing sweat via this way. Now, a different form of this is the apocrine form of secretion we see in mammary glands. In this case, the mammary glands wrap up what is produced, okay, by the Golgi body. So mammary glands are going to produce the milk, And the Golgi body are going to produce the secretory vesicles, and we're going to hold those secretory vesicles here in the apical part of the cell, the top part of the cell. Okay? And when it's time, we are going to pinch this portion of the cell that has all of the secretory vesicles with the milk in it. We're going to pinch this apart, allowing this to be released. You can see it here. All of this is going to break down, releasing the milk into the duct. Okay, and then we go from this cell, we start regrowing it again, filling it full, and then rupturing it again. And then back to here and back to, okay? So the way I remember apocrine secretion is the apical part of the cell bursts, okay? Now, holocrine secretion, that's the third type. That's the easiest one because holocrine, the whole cell bursts. So by the time the cell makes its way up here to the top where it's going to dump, so here's the place where the stuff is going to be dumped into. The cells go through cell division, and you can see them going through the different stages. Here's metaphase, okay? Here we're getting into anaphase. Here's telophase happening over here. So we're going through cell division, and as it's growing, these cells are producing more and more of the secretory vesicles. And when they get up to the top and they've reached their lifespan, the cells are going to burst. So the whole cell bursts, releasing its contents out into that area, that white space area above. Okay? So that's our three types of secretion. Merocrine secretion, okay, is just dumping it through exocytosis. Apocrine secretion, that's the apical part of the cell breaks down. And then holocrine secretion, we're going to see the whole cell burst. Okay? All right, we're through with our epithelial tissue. Let's move on to connective tissue. When we think about connective tissue, it is very diverse because it has lots of different functions. We have functions that are going to connect the epithelium to the rest of the body. We're going to see it provide structure. We're going to see it store energy for us. We're going to transport materials like blood. Okay? And you should never see anybody's connective tissue. Okay? There should always be epithelial tissue covering somebody's connective tissue. If you see their connective tissue, we know they're not in homeostasis. Okay? So there are three characteristics to all connective tissues. Okay? Three connective tissues. One, we've got different kinds of specialized cells that live there, that live in this tissue. The second one is we've got protein fibers. Okay? Lots of protein fibers inside of this. And number three, we've got an extracellular ground substance. Okay? So we've got these specialized cells that are going to occur in here. And then on the outside of these cells, we're going to have this fluid, this extracellular goo. And in this extracellular goo, we're going to have these extracellular protein fibers that are going to give it support. Okay? So let's take a look at these. Keeping in mind these three characteristics. Okay? So this shows us a mess down here at the bottom. Okay? This is called a loose connective tissue. Okay? And notice that we've got all kinds of different protein fibers. The yellow, okay, the little black elastic fibers. These are all going in different directions. So when they're going in different directions, we're asking for support for all directions. Okay? With lots of different cells. Okay? Macrophages are here, mast cells are here. We got some fat cells in this area. Okay? All kinds of different cells for different functions. Okay? Now, the difference between our loose connective tissue and a dense connective tissue is how many fibers do you have? Okay? Fibers versus ground substance. We got less fibers and more of the goo in loose connective tissue. Okay? We have more fibers, less goo in the dense connective tissue. Okay? What fibers do we have? Well, three big types. Collagen fibers, that's probably the most common that we're going to see in the connective tissues. Then we've got reticular fibers. These we're going to find on the outside of organs and things like that to give them support, almost like they're going to be ensheathed in it, like you put a knife into a sheath. So they're going to have this carrier, almost this really strong support system. Okay, and then elastic fibers. These are for stretch. Okay, they're going to return back to their original length. So those are the three types of protein fibers. Here's what collagen fibers look like. Remember we talked about structural proteins versus our globular proteins. These are definitely structural, long and skinny. Okay, and then the ground substance. It's typically some form of clear, colorless, thick fluid. And its job is to fill the spaces in between the cells and the protein fibers. And because it's thick, it's going to slow pathogens that make their way through our body. Okay, so if the epithelium can't take it out, we're going to have a nice slowdown in the connective tissue so that the cells in the connective tissue can handle them. Okay, so we'll look at this ground substance, okay, this goo. All right, we break down the connective tissues into different forms. The loose connective tissues, the ones we're going to talk about as being loose, which would mean all their fibers are going different directions, and we've got fewer fibers, much more of the goo. We're going to see areolar connective tissue, okay? We're going to see adipose tissue. We're going to see reticular tissue, okay? And all of these are basically protecting the body, some form or fashion, okay? So let's take a look at these. Okay, so here is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is a loose connective tissue, okay? And when I look at this, it looks almost like soap bubbles, okay? I also think of bubble wrap a lot of times when I see this because it's very protective. And what it's storing on the inside of this, what's on the inside is going to be our lipid reserve. So this is where the fat is stored in here, okay? And where these cells come together, we put protein fibers. You can see them better over here in this area like that. There's some good fibers over here in this region, okay? And the rest of them are just laying up along the edge of the cells, okay? It's going to be loosely arranged, so we get a loose connective tissue called adipose tissue, okay? If it's a dense connective tissue, we have more fibers, less goo. So notice here on this tendon that's the picture showing us, all of the fibers tend to be running in one direction, giving us good support in one direction, okay? And we're going to need that if the muscle is attached to the bone. I need it to be as rope-like as possible. The more threads on the rope, stronger the rope, right? So if it's dense regular, they're all going in one direction. Dense irregular, there's a whole bunch of them, but they're going in different directions. Okay, so let's look at some of this. Up at the top, we have a loose connective tissue. This one is areolar connective tissue. Okay, here's tendon with all of those fibers going in long cylindrical bands. Then we've got a cartilage down here that we're going to find some tissue fibers going in all along and through here that you can see. Okay, so fluid connective tissue. One of them is blood, the other is the lymph, okay? And the job is to have different kinds of cells. So here are all our blood cells, red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets. The matrix is going to be the plasma that the cells live in. And from the protein fiber standpoint, when we form a clot, we go through the whole process of producing a fibrin protein net to catch the cells and catch the platelets in. Okay, so we have all three of those in the connective tissue of blood and lymph. And here is a picture of the slide of blood. Okay, and you can see we've got different blood cells. All the little red ones here that look like donuts, these are the red blood cells, kind of pink ones. And then we've got a couple of different white blood cells. All three of these white blood cells are different. They have different jobs. We've got a neutrophil up here at the top. Not that you need to know that. We've got a lymphocyte over here, and we have, looks like an eosinophil here. Okay. Also, I can see these little platelets, all these little sandbags that are out here smaller than our blood cells. Okay. And we'll look at this a lot too. Okay. So bone and blood are both connective tissues. Okay. Bone and blood are both connective tissue. Bone, it's cells that live in that solid matrix. It's not going to be a gel type matrix. It's going to be solid. Okay. Blood has the thinnest with the plasma. Bone has the thickest with the calcium phosphate crystals that are forming the actual bone itself. Okay, so we got cartilage and bone that are also connective tissues. Okay, cartilage has a gel type ground substance. Bone, it's a calcified, so it's more like concrete. Okay, and there are a number of substances that help form this matrix. Okay, don't worry about any of this on this page, other than in cartilage, we've got chondrocytes. That's the name of the cell that lives in cartilage. In bone, we call them osteocytes. And both of these guys, chondrocytes and osteocytes, they live in a chamber called a lacunae. Okay, so let's look at that. Okay, each one of these is a cell living inside of a lacunae. Okay, and we've got three different, so you can see this one here, the cell is missing from its lacunae. Same thing here, no cell in it. The rest of them, we can see the nuclei of the cell. Here's that nuclei, and then the cell itself is this structure like that. Okay, so three types of cartilage. We're going to talk about hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fiber cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is found all over the body at every one of the junctions between our bones that has a cartilaginous connection. It's hyaline cartilage. Okay, so you can see here on the humerus going into the scapula, we've got hyaline cartilage. Okay, we'll talk more about hyaline cartilage coming up. We also have elastic cartilage. We find this in our ear. Our ears are very flexible. You can pull on your ear and it snaps right back into place. And that's due to all of these fibers that you can see. Okay, all these fibers. And then you can also see the little bubbles here. Those are the chondrocytes inside of the lacunae. Okay, so if we remove the cell, there would still be an open spot here. That open spot would be the lacunae. Okay, but loose arrangement, lots of elastic fibers. Gives it lots of stretch. And then fiber cartilage. Fiber cartilage is much denser. And look at all those collagen fibers going in one direction. They're all going in one direction. And then we see a few cells. Here is the lacunae. And here's my cell. Here's my chondrocyte with its nucleus in the middle. So you can see that over here as well. Here's my lacunae with the cell inside of it. So a lot of times it looks like an eyeball looking back at you. Okay? And then we've got bone. Bone looks like a bunch of tree stumps that we've cut, and we can see the growth rings on the inside because bone grows as rings. Okay? So, bone tissue has different kinds of cells inside of it. Okay? We're going to talk to you about the osteocytes. We're going to talk about osteoblasts. But again, these live in a lacunae. So if we remove the cell that's inside that cell right there, there would be an open hole. and that would be the lacunae. Okay, you can see the little fiber optic cables that run between these guys here. That's so that they can communicate with one another. It's called the canaliculi. We'll talk about that. Okay. Now, if we put a connective tissue together with an epithelial tissue, we can form a membrane. Okay. So there's 4 types of membranes, and all 4 of these are epithelial tissue combined with connective tissue. We've got mucous membranes, we've got serous membranes, we've got cutaneous membranes, and we have synovial membranes. So let's take a look at these right quick. Okay, here's a mucous membrane. The big cell that gives it away, this dude right here, this is a goblet cell. Its job is to produce the mucus. So it's going to pump out mucus here. Okay, we've got the epithelial cells doing that. You can see the white space above here, so it has to be epithelial tissue, and then underneath that here is the connective tissue backer, that lamina propria that we see with the blood supply in it. Remember, the epithelial tissue is avascular, the connective tissue can be vascular. Okay? So that's a mucous membrane. Where do we find those? Respiratory system, reproductive system, urinary system, digestive system. Okay? All of these places. Then we've got a serous membrane. These are going to separate the cavities in the body. Typically, we've got simple squamous epithelium with connective tissue underneath. Okay? And this connective tissue is a relar connective tissue. So it's loosely arranged, blood supply to it, fibers going in different directions with a very thin epithelium. And typically there's some fluid in here. Okay? There's some fluid. That's transudate is the fluid. So we'll look at these serous membranes when we're talking about the cavities of the body. Then we've got the cutaneous membrane. Okay, so this is your skin. So the epithelium, that is the stratified squamous epithelium, and the dermis, okay, the upper part of the dermis is a relar connective tissue. Below that upper part of the dermis is the reticular layer of the dermis. Okay, so we've got a relar connective tissue above and a little dense irregular connective tissue below. The job here, much more for protection. Okay, big, thick epidermis, big, thick dermis. The 4th membrane type are the synovial membranes. And these have an epithelium with a connective tissue backer that's going to help support it. And it forms this capsule that encapsulates the fluid that we see in the joint. You can see the cartilage here. This would be hyaline cartilage between the 2 bones. And then a little space here. This is where the synovial fluid would be. And this is what holds that fluid encapsulated in this joint. Okay? Provides protection, allows for it to move over, slide across, lubricate it, all by holding that fluid in place. Okay, then we move to the 3 types of muscle tissue. Okay, whole different class of tissues. We've got skeletal muscle that's going to move the muscles in our bodies. It's going to be responsible for attaching the bones and allowing for movement. Cardiac muscle, this is going to allow us to pump the heart so that the blood can be forced through the body. And then smooth muscle, we're going to contract to relax this muscle in order to help move things through the tubes in our body, like blood vessels, like the urinary bladder, the digestive system, the reproductive system, okay? And they look quite different, okay? Smooth muscle, it's a tapered cell. It's a very flattened cell, so it takes on a shape that is much like that. It's tapered on both ends with a little slit-like nucleus here in the middle. Okay, the skeletal muscle, these are huge cells. Okay, so we're looking at from here, all of this is just one cell. Okay, and we can see that this cell up here, the top cell, has multiple nuclei. So that's a characteristic of these skeletal muscle cells. And then cardiac muscle cells are much smaller. they don't have this multiple slit-like nucleus that we see up here. Kind of have a round nucleus that occurs in the center of the cell. And they've got these little connections between the cells. These are called intercalated discs, okay? And they are where one cell plugs into another cell. So, muscles are easy to classify. We use three main categories to classify them. Are they striated or not? Do they have a single nucleus, or are they multinucleated? And lastly, are they voluntary or are they involuntary? Okay, so as far as striations go, skeletal muscle or striated muscle and cardiac muscle, they are striated. They have bands. It's based on their proteins on the inside that give them these bands. From the standpoint of nuclei, both smooth and cardiac are single nucleated, where skeletal, or you can call it striated, it is multinucleated. And then the last one, voluntary or involuntary, there's only one that's voluntary, that is skeletal muscle. We have to think to move our arms and legs. Involuntary, I don't worry about changing the blood pressure. I don't have to think about that. I don't have to think about my heart beating. So they are both involuntary. Okay, so this shows you a good picture of skeletal muscle. All of those stripes that you see that are vertical, this is due to the protein fibers in it. And because these are so huge, we typically call them muscle fibers. We don't call them muscle cells, we call them muscle fibers. Okay, very long, very thin, they don't divide. Okay, we got all the muscle cells that we're going to have. If you have big muscles, it's just because your muscle fibers or cells are bigger. You've added more protein to them. But they're striated, voluntary, and multinucleated. Okay, cardiac muscle, it's also striated, but it is involuntary and single nucleated with structures that we call intercalated discs. Okay, and that's these connections. It's almost like a plug you plug in to the wall socket. They have many, many little bumps that fit together, increasing the surface area. So you get these vertical lines along with the striations that you can see. But a big round circular nucleus, and it is involuntary, okay? The heart can beat on its own. In fact, person can be brain dead and their heart beats right along because it has pacemaker cells inside the heart that go through spontaneous depolarization and cause that heart to beat. And then we've got smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is called smooth muscle because it looks very smooth. Okay, it's a little small tapered cell, little slit-like nucleus. Okay, kind of nondescript when you look at it. They're very small and they're not striated. They are involuntary and they have a single nucleus. Okay, so we see this in, like I said, the digestive system. We see it in tubes, typically along the outer portion of the tube. You can see an intestine down here in the bottom. Okay, and along the outside, we're going to have smooth muscle that allows us to make the diameter of the hole inside smaller or relax it and make it bigger. Okay, and we'll talk about the function of smooth muscle as it's moving these fluids through our body. And then the last of our tissue types, this is the nervous tissue. And we got two kinds of cells here. You can see the big blobby cell down here at the bottom, all of this guy here. This is that big cell body of a neuron. And all of these little bitty guys out here, these are the neuroglial cells. Okay, this is another nerve cell over here. Okay, so the neuron is what does the communication. The neuroglial cells are the support cells. Now, I often say that this looks like a squash bug. When we see it under a microscope, it looks like a bug has hit your windshield and splattered, and then the juices just kind of go off in all directions. That's what the cell body looks like. And we're going to find these in the brain, the spinal cord, in our nerves, that kind of thing. Okay. And they can be very long. They can go from your big toe up to your spinal cord. Okay. And contain nuclei. They're your normal cell, but their job is to conduct electrical impulse. Okay. The cell body of it is the big portion that you see over here with the trees sticking off, called the dendrites. And the long part is called the axon. Okay, so we'll look at how these long axons make their way and make up most of the nerves that we see in the body. And then we've got the little neuroglial cells. Okay, the neuroglial cells are what maintain the physical structure of the tissue. They help to repair anything if it's damaged, as long as that's not in the brain or spinal cord. They can do phagocytosis, meaning they can do endocytosis of solid things. They can help provide nutrients to the neurons, and they can help regulate the fluid that surrounds our neurons. Okay, so we'll talk about these support cells when we get to the nervous system. Okay, so you hear a lot of the term glio. Okay, glio, that kind of thing. My mother-in-law, she passed away from a glioblastoma, which was one of these glial cells mutated and turned into cancer. So that's the 4 tissue types, okay? And this gets us through the first bit of test material. So our first big lecture test will be over these 4 chapters: introduction, chemistry, cell, and tissues, okay?